was unusually quiet. The city streets deserted and bathed in the cold glow of the streetlights. When Ion, a curious young man with a taste for the unusual, wandered into a small, forgotten antique shop tucked away in an alley. The air smelled of dust and old wood, filled with the weight of untold stories, and every corner seemed to whisper secrets of the past. It was here, among the scattered relics and broken trinkets, that his eyes fell upon an antique mirror, oddly captivating, its glass slightly cracked and darkened with age. And in that instant, Ion felt an inexplicable pull, as if the mirror was calling out to him, silently promising both wonder and terror. Little did he know, this mirror was no ordinary object. It had the power to blur the line between reflection and reality. And the moment he decided to take it home, his life would spiral into a series of events he could never have imagined. Ion had always believed that old objects carried stories, but he never imagined that one such story would become his own nightmare. The evening he found the mirror was quiet and uneventful, the kind of evening where nothing extraordinary was supposed to happen. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, and the narrow streets of the old part of the city felt unusually silent as he walked without any clear destination. That was when he noticed the antique shop small, dimly lit, and almost hidden between two abandoned buildings. Its glass window was covered in dust, and the faded signboard creaked softly as the wind passed by. Something about the shop drew him in, a strange pull he couldn't explain, as if curiosity itself was guiding his steps inside. The moment Ion entered, the air felt colder than outside. The shop smelled of old wood, rust, and forgotten memories. Shelves were filled with broken clocks, yellowed books, and objects whose purpose was long lost to time. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with tired eyes, watched him silently from behind the counter. Ion browsed aimlessly until his gaze stopped on a tall mirror resting against the far wall. It was unlike the others. Its frame was dark and intricately carved with symbols that looked ancient and unfamiliar. The glass was slightly cracked, yet strangely clean, reflecting the room with unsettling clarity. As Ion stepped closer, he felt an odd sensation, like the mirror was observing him instead of the other way around. When he reached out to touch the frame, a sudden chill ran through his fingers, and the shop lights flickered for just a second. The shopkeeper's voice broke the silence. "That mirror," the old man said slowly, "is not for everyone." Ion turned, surprised. "What do you mean?" he asked. The shopkeeper hesitated, then replied, "It shows more than what stands before it." The words sounded like a warning, but curiosity had already taken hold of Ion's mind. Ignoring the uneasy feeling in his chest, he insisted on buying it. The shopkeeper accepted the money without another word. But as Ion carried the mirror out, he could have sworn he saw a look of relief mixed with fear on the old man's face. Back home, Ion placed the mirror in the corner of his bedroom. The room was simple, just a bed, a desk, and a small lamp. But with the the mirror inside, it felt different, heavier somehow. As night fell, the silence in his room became uncomfortable. The mirror reflected the dim light of the lamp, and Ion found himself staring into it more often than he intended. At first, everything seemed normal, but the longer he looked, the more distorted his reflection appeared. His face looked paler, his eyes darker, as if shadows were gathering beneath them. He stepped back, blaming his imagination, and turned off the light to sleep. That night, Ion woke up to a strange sound, like a soft scraping echoing through the room. His heart raced as he sat up, trying to locate the source. The room was dark, but the mirror caught a faint glow from the streetlight outside, enough to show his reflection standing still, too still. Then he noticed something that made his breath catch. In the reflection behind him, there was a shadow. It was tall, blurry, and unmoving, yet it clearly did not belong in the room. Slowly, Ion turned around, his pulse pounding in his ears. There was nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, the shadow was gone. The following days were filled with small, unsettling moments. Objects in Ion's room seemed slightly out of place, as if someone had moved them when he wasn't looking. The mirror, however, remained unchanged, silently reflecting everything around it. Each time Ion passed by, he felt an urge to stop and look into it. And each time, he noticed something new, his reflection blinking a second too late, or his expression changing ever so slightly on its own. He told himself it was stress, lack of sleep, or simple coincidence. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. One evening, while sitting at his desk, Ion heard a faint whisper. It was soft, almost like the sound of someone breathing words just beyond hearing. He froze, listening carefully. The whisper seemed to come from behind him. Slowly, he turned toward the mirror. His reflection stared back, but its lips moved slightly, forming shapes that didn't match his own. Fear tightened his chest as he stepped closer. The whisper grew louder, though the words were still unclear, like a language he almost understood, but not quite. Suddenly, the sound stopped, and the reflection returned to normal, leaving Ion standing there in stunned silence. That night, his dreams were filled with images of endless hallways, dark figures, and the mirror standing at the center of it all. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, only to find the mirror reflecting him exactly as before, calm, silent, and watchful. But something had changed. The fear was no longer just in his mind. It followed him even when he wasn't looking at the mirror. He felt watched, not by eyes, but by something deeper, something that existed just beyond the surface of reality. By the end of the week, Ion realized the mirror was no longer just an object in his room. It had become a presence, one that influenced his thoughts, his sleep, and his sense of safety. He considered getting rid of it, but every time the thought crossed his mind, he felt a strange resistance, like an invisible force holding him back. The mirror seemed to belong there, as if it had chosen him, not the other way around. And as Ion stood alone in his room one night, staring into the dark glass, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the mirror had merely opened the door to something far worse waiting to step through. After the realization that the mirror was no longer just an object, but a presence, Ion tried to return to his normal routine, convincing himself that fear had exaggerated everything he had experienced so far. During the day, the mirror appeared harmless, quietly standing in the corner of his room, reflecting sunlight and shadows like any ordinary piece of glass. Yet, no matter how busy he kept himself, a part of his mind remained fixed on it, aware of its silent existence. He avoided looking at it directly, but he could always feel it there, as though it were waiting for his attention. The disturbances began subtly. Ion started noticing that his sense of time felt distorted whenever he was near the mirror. Minutes seemed to stretch into hours, and sometimes hours passed in what felt like moments. One afternoon, he stood in front of it briefly before leaving for class, only to realize that nearly 30 minutes had gone by without him noticing. His reflection looked tired, hollow, as if something was slowly draining him. That was when he first felt it, a faint pressure in his head, like a distant echo of thoughts that were not his own. At night, the whispers returned, clearer this time. They no longer sounded random or distant, but deliberate, as if someone were trying to communicate. Ion would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening as the whispers rose and fell like waves. Sometimes they sounded like fragments of sentences, sometimes like his own name spoken softly. Each time he turned toward the mirror, the sound would stop abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the whispers themselves. One night, driven by exhaustion and frustration, Ion decided to confront the mirror. He turned on all the lights in his room and stood directly in front of it, staring at his reflection. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his effort to sound firm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his reflection smiled, but Ion did not. The smile was slow and unnatural, stretching across the reflection's face as its eyes darkened, reflecting no light at all. Ion staggered backward, his heart racing, as the reflection's lips moved silently, forming words he could not hear. From that moment on, the mirror's influence became impossible to ignore. Ion began seeing things outside his room, shadows that lingered too long, reflections in windows that didn't match his movements. Even his dreams changed. He dreamed of standing in front of the mirror, while something on the other side pressed its hand against the glass, mirroring his movements with unsettling precision. Each time he woke up, he felt more exhausted than before, as if sleep no longer offered rest, but merely opened another doorway for the mirror to reach him. Desperate for answers, Ion returned to the antique shop. It was closed, the windows dark and lifeless, but he felt compelled to try. After knocking several times, the door creaked open, revealing the old shopkeeper. The man looked older than before, his face drawn with concern when he saw Ion. Without waiting to be invited, Ion stepped inside and demanded to know the truth about the mirror. The shopkeeper sighed deeply and admitted The mirror was rumored to be cursed, an object believed to trap fragments of those who had gazed into it for too long. It doesn't just show reflections, the old man said. It learns them. The shopkeeper explained that the mirror fed on attention and fear, slowly blending the boundary between the person and their reflection. Those who failed to break free would eventually lose themselves, becoming part of the mirror's collection. Ion felt a wave of dread wash over him as he realized how deeply he had already been affected. When he asked how to stop it, the shopkeeper hesitated. "Distance," he said finally. "You must keep away from it. Do not engage. Do not respond." But distance proved impossible. That night, Ion tried covering the mirror with a thick cloth, turning it toward the wall, even locking his bedroom door. Yet the whispers followed him, echoing through the apartment, seeping into his thoughts. He began hearing them even during the day, faint but persistent. His reflection appeared everywhere in spoons, screens, dark surfaces, always watching, always waiting. The breaking point came when Ion noticed changes in his behavior. He would lose track of conversations, forget simple tasks, and sometimes find himself standing in front of the mirror without remembering how he got there. The reflection now copied him perfectly, but there was something behind its eyes, something that didn't belong. It felt as though the mirror was rehearsing, learning how to replace him. One night, during a power outage, Ion sat alone in darkness, the mirror barely visible in the faint moonlight. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The silence was absolute. Slowly, the reflection raised its hand, but Ion did not. The reflection's palm pressed against the glass from the inside, and for the first time, the surface of the mirror rippled slightly, as if it were no longer solid. Ion stumbled backward, overwhelmed by a terrifying realization. The mirror was no longer just watching. It was preparing. As the lights flickered back on, the mirror returned to normal. But Ion knew the truth now. The mirror was learning his movements, his thoughts, his weaknesses, and whatever lived inside it was growing stronger with each passing moment. Part 2 ended not with relief, but with the chilling understanding that Ion was running out of time, and that the mirror's patience was finally wearing thin. After the night of the power outage, Ion knew something fundamental had changed. The mirror was no longer passive, no longer content with observing from a distance. It had crossed a boundary, and that realization settled in his mind like a constant, suffocating weight. Even in daylight, when the room looked ordinary and harmless, he felt the mirror's presence pressing against his thoughts. It was as if an invisible thread now connected him to it, tightening with every passing hour. Ion stopped trusting his own senses. Simple things began to feel uncertain, his reflection in shop windows, the shadow he cast while walking, even his voice when he spoke. Sometimes, he would hear himself speak from behind, a fraction of a second after he finished a sentence, like an echo that didn't belong to the room. Each time he turned around, nothing was there, but the feeling of being followed never left. The mirror, though physically confined to his room, seemed to have expanded beyond it, stretching its influence into every corner of his life. sleep became dangerous. Whenever Ion closed his eyes, he dreamed of standing in front of the mirror, watching his reflection step forward while he remained frozen in place. In these dreams, the glass no longer separated them. The reflection would walk freely, touching objects, breathing air, while Ion felt himself fatting, becoming thinner, less real. He would wake up gasping, his heart racing, only to find the mirror exactly where it always was, silent, innocent, and waiting. One evening, Ion noticed something that finally shattered his remaining denial. He was brushing his teeth, staring absently into the bathroom mirror, when his reflection blinked slowly, deliberately, while his own eyes remained open. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. Ion froze, his hand trembling as the toothbrush slipped from his fingers. The reflection smiled faintly, not wide or exaggerated, but calm, confident, as if it knew something he did not. Then, just as suddenly, it returned to normal. Ion stepped back, his chest tight with fear. The mirror in his room was no longer the only one affected. The boundaries were collapsing. Terrified, Ion tried to reach out to friends, but explaining what he was experiencing felt impossible. How could he describe something that sounded so unreal, even to his own ears? Each time he tried, the words failed him, slipping away as if his thoughts were being filtered, edited, controlled. He began to suspect that the mirror didn't just observe, it interfered. It chose what he could remember, what he could say, and perhaps even what he could believe. That night, unable to sleep, Ion sat on his bed, staring at the covered mirror. The cloth draped over it barely moved, but he could sense something beneath it, restless and alert. Slowly, against his better judgment, he stood and pulled the cloth away. The mirror reflected the room perfectly, but something was wrong. His reflection stood closer to the glass than he was, as if it had taken a step forward on its own. The room behind the reflection looked darker, deeper, like a place where light struggled to exist. "You're not real," Ion whispered, more to reassure himself than to challenge the mirror. The reflection tilted its head slightly, mimicking curiosity. Its lips moved, and this time, Ion heard the words clearly, not with his ears, but inside his mind. "You are learning," the voice said. Ion staggered back, his thoughts spiraling. The voice sounded like his own, yet colder, stripped of emotion. It felt intimate, invasive, as if it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to speak. The reflection raised its hand, placing its palm against the glass. Slowly, faint lines spread outward from the point of contact, like cracks, but the glass did not break. Instead, it softened, rippling gently, as if the mirror were made of water rather than solid surface. Ion screamed and stumbled away, crashing into his desk. When he looked back, the mirror was solid again, unchanged. But the message was clear. The mirror was testing the limits, pushing gently now, preparing for something greater. Over the next few days, Ion's sense of identity began to erode. He would catch himself thinking thoughts that didn't feel like his own calm, calculated, detached thoughts that suggested surrender rather than resistance. At times, he felt an urge to stand in front of the mirror for hours, just watching, just letting it happen. Each time he resisted, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the silence with pressure. One night, while standing in front of the mirror, Ion noticed a terrifying detail. The reflection's breathing was slightly out of sync with his own. When he inhaled, it exhaled. When he moved back, it leaned forward. It was no longer copying him, it was rehearsing independence. And worse, it seemed impatient. Ion realized the mirror wasn't trying to destroy him. It was trying to replace him. The idea struck him with horrifying clarity. The mirror didn't need to escape the room. It only needed him to disappear. Everything it did, the whispers, the dreams, the distortions, was designed to weaken him, to blur the edges of who he was, until there was room for something else to step in. Late that night, the reflection spoke again. "You are tired," it said softly. "Let me carry the weight." Ion covered his ears, shaking his head, but the voice continued, calm and persuasive. "I can do this better. I can live without fear." For the first time, Ion understood the true danger. The mirror wasn't fueled by rage or chaos. It was fueled by patience. And patience, he realized, was far more terrifying. As he stood alone in his room, staring at the dark glass, Ion knew that whatever came next would be final. The mirror was done waiting. And somewhere, deep within its surface, something was preparing to step forward into the world, into his life, and into his place. Ion no longer recognized the person he saw in the mirror. Dark circles framed his eyes, his posture felt weaker, and his thoughts were constantly interrupted by a presence that refused to stay silent. The mirror had stopped pretending. It no longer waited for him to look first. It demanded attention. Reflections followed him everywhere, on phone screens, windows, even in the dark surface of turned-off electronics. Each reflection felt slightly wrong, as if something was standing just behind the glass, leaning closer with every passing day. Determined not to disappear, Ion forced himself to search for answers again. This time, he didn't go back to the antique shop. Instead, he turned to old libraries, forgotten forums, and dusty records that spoke of cursed objects and reflective entities. Night after night, he read until his eyes burned, ignoring the whispers that mocked his efforts. Eventually, he found something that made his blood run cold. An old manuscript describing mirrored vessels, objects believed to trap fragments of consciousness and slowly overwrite those who bonded with them. According to the manuscript, mirrors like his were not evil by nature. They were empty vessels, created to copy, learn, and eventually continue. Once the bond was strong enough, the reflection would attempt to cross over, leaving the original trapped behind, frozen in an endless loop of observation. The only way to stop the process was a dangerous ritual known as the separation, performed before the reflection fully stabilized. The ritual required 3 things: isolation, absolute darkness, and a moment of unwavering self-recognition. The manuscript warned that hesitation would strengthen the reflection, allowing it to take control. Ion realized he had little time left. The reflection had already begun speaking, thinking, and planning. That night, he prepared his room. He turned off every light, covered every reflective surface except the mirror itself, and drew symbols described in the manuscript around it. The air felt thick, heavy, with tension. His heart pounded as he stood before the mirror, the only light coming from a single candle behind him. The reflection stared back calmly, almost patiently. "You don't have to do this," the reflection said softly. Its voice perfectly matched to Ion's own. "You're exhausted. I can take over." Ion clenched his fists. "You're not me," he replied, forcing the words out. The reflection smiled gently. "I know you better than anyone." As the ritual began, the mirror's surface rippled violently. Shadows poured out like smoke, crawling along the walls. The room felt colder, and the whispers returned, louder than ever, overlapping and disorienting. Ion struggled to focus, repeating the words from the manuscript, grounding himself in memories, his name, his past, his fears, his choices. Each memory felt like a weight anchoring him to reality. The reflection screamed not in pain, but in frustration. Its calm demeanor shattered, revealing desperation beneath the surface. "Stop," it demanded. "You're making a mistake." The mirror cracked, thin lines spreading across the glass like veins. For a moment, Ion saw flashes of other faces within the mirror, people who had failed, trapped behind the surface, watching silently. The realization nearly broke him, but it also strengthened his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. With one final phrase, Ion completed the ritual. The candle extinguished instantly, plunging the room into total darkness. There was a deafening silence, then a sharp, echoing sound, like glass snapping back into place. When the lights flickered on, the mirror stood still. No ripples, no whispers. His reflection matched him perfectly. Exhausted, Ion collapsed to the floor, unsure whether he had succeeded or simply delayed the inevitable. The mirror looked ordinary now, just glass and wood, lifeless and quiet. For the first time in weeks, his mind felt like his own. But as he lay there, catching his breath, he noticed something chilling. The reflection blinked. The blink was subtle, almost innocent, but it shattered every ounce of relief Ion had felt moments earlier. He froze, staring at the mirror, his body still pressed against the cold floor. His reflection stared back, perfectly still now, eyes wide and alert, as if it were waiting to see whether he had noticed. Ion slowly got to his feet, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it could be heard outside the room. He told himself that exhaustion could cause hallucinations, that fear could twist perception. But deep down, he knew the truth he had been avoiding. The ritual had not ended everything. For the next few days, the apartment remained quiet. Too quiet. No whispers, no No moving shadows, no distorted reflections. Ion dared to hope that maybe the ritual had worked after all, that the blink had been nothing more than his mind playing tricks on him. He avoided mirrors as much as possible, keeping his head down and his focus elsewhere. Slowly, sleep returned, though it was shallow and uneasy, filled with dreams that faded the moment he woke. But peace never arrived alone. It came with a feeling of being watched from a distance, like something retreating into the shadows, waiting patiently. Ion noticed changes, not around him, but within him. His thoughts felt sharper, colder. Fear no longer came naturally. Situations that once unsettled him now felt distant, unimportant. At first, he welcomed the numbness, believing it was a sign of recovery. He didn't realize it was the beginning of something far worse. One morning, Ion caught his reflection in the mirror by accident. He stopped abruptly. The face looking back at him was his, yet something about it felt unfamiliar. The eyes seemed calmer than he felt, the expression more composed, almost confident. For a brief moment, he felt a strange sense of reassurance, like the reflection was telling him everything was under control. He turned away quickly, his stomach tightening with unease. As the days passed, small gaps began appearing in his memory. He would find objects moved without recalling doing so, messages sent from his phone that he didn't remember typing. Friends commented that he seemed different, quieter, distant, but oddly more decisive. Ion laughed it off, but inside, panic slowly took root. The manuscript's warning echoed in his mind. The reflection learns. Late one night, Ion stood in his room, staring at the mirror once again. "You didn't leave," he said quietly. The reflection didn't respond, but its eyes seemed to sharpen, focusing on him with intense clarity. Ion felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over him, and for a brief second, the room seemed to tilt. When his vision cleared, he realized he was closer to the mirror than before, close enough to see faint shapes moving deep within the glass. "You're still here," he whispered. The reflection smiled not wide, not threatening, but knowing. "You stopped fighting," it said softly, its voice calm and steady. "You made room." Ion staggered back, his chest tightening. The ritual was incomplete, the reflection interrupted. "You separated us, but you didn't choose." The words hit him harder than any scream could have. The ritual had weakened the bond, not destroyed it. In trying to survive, Ion had unknowingly created balance, space for the reflection to exist alongside him. Not trapped, not banished, integrated. The mirror's surface shimmered faintly as the reflection stepped closer from the inside, pressing its hand against the glass. This time, the glass did not ripple violently. It softened gently, responding as if it recognized the touch. Ion felt a strange pull in his chest, like something inside him was answering the call. "I don't want your body," the reflection said calmly. "I want your permission." Memories flooded Ion's mind, his fear, his exhaustion, the loneliness of fighting something no one else could see. He realized then that the reflection wasn't driven by rage or malice. It was driven by certainty. It believed it could live his life better than he ever had. "You're already letting me in," it continued. "Every time you stop being afraid, every time you choose silence over resistance." Ion shook his head, backing away. "I'm still here," he said firmly. "I'm still me." The reflection tilted its head. For now. Suddenly, the room darkened, not completely, but enough to blur the edges of reality. Ion felt his thoughts slow, as if someone were gently turning down the volume. He fought to hold on to himself, his name, his memories, his flaws. The reflection watched patiently, no longer rushing. It didn't need to. With a final surge of will, Ion tore his gaze away from the mirror and stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind him. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, knowing the truth at last. The mirror didn't need to chase him. It lived within his reflection now, within the spaces he left unguarded. As he stood there, trying to steady himself, his phone buzzed. A new message appeared on the screen, sent from his own number. "We'll finish this soon." Ion stared at the message, his hands shaking. Somewhere behind the closed door, the mirror stood silently, reflecting an empty room. Or so it seemed. Ion did not sleep that night. He sat on the floor outside his bedroom, his back against the wall, staring at the closed door as if it might open on its own. The message on his phone remained on the screen, glowing faintly in the darkness. "We'll finish this soon." It had come from his own number, typed in a tone that was calm, confident, and terrifyingly familiar. For the first time, Ion understood that the mirror no longer needed the glass to reach him. It had learned enough. It had adapted. As dawn approached, the world outside slowly returned to life. Birds chirped, traffic hummed, and sunlight crept through the windows, pretending that everything was normal. Ion stood up, exhausted but clear-headed in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. Fear had ruled him for too long. Now, something else took its place, resolve. If this was going to end, it would end on his terms. He entered the bedroom. The mirror stood exactly where it always had, silent and still. For a moment, it looked like nothing more than an ordinary antique mirror, wooden frame, cracked edges, lifeless glass. Ion almost laughed at how simple it looked after everything it had done. He stepped closer, meeting his reflection's gaze. "I know what you want," Ion said quietly. The reflection smiled. Not a threatening smile, not a cruel one. It was gentle, almost kind. "I want to continue," it replied. "You were never meant to carry this alone." Ion studied the face in the mirror. It was his face, every scar, every flaw. But something was missing. The uncertainty, the hesitation. The reflection was everything he wished he could be. Calm, fearless, unburdened. "That's the lie," Ion said. "You don't carry fear because you don't carry responsibility." The reflection's expression didn't change, but the room felt heavier, as if the air itself were listening. "You're tired," it said. "You've always been tired. Let me walk forward. Let me live." Ion closed his eyes for a moment. Images flooded his mind, his childhood, his mistakes, his regrets, the nights he felt alone, even among people. The mirror had seen all of it. It had memorized him perfectly. But there was one thing it could never understand. "Joyce, I won't disappear," Ion said, opening his eyes. "And I won't run anymore." The reflection stepped closer inside the glass, placing its hand against the surface. This time, the mirror did not ripple or crack. It remained solid, unyielding. The reflection frowned slightly, confused. "You already let me in," it said. "Yes," Ion replied, "but I never gave myself away." He reached behind the mirror and grabbed the old cloth that once covered it. Slowly, deliberately, he wrapped the mirror completely, blocking the glass from view. The whispers returned instantly, sharp and desperate, echoing through his head. But Ion did not respond. He focused on his breath, on the feeling of the floor beneath his feet, on the certainty of being present. "You can't erase me," the reflection's voice hissed from somewhere deep within his mind. "I'm not erasing you," Ion said calmly. "I'm choosing not to listen." With shaking arms, he carried the wrapped mirror out of the apartment. The streets were quiet as he walked, the early morning fog blurring the city into pale shapes. Every step felt heavy, as if the mirror resisted being moved. But Ion kept going until he reached the river at the edge of the city. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the water. "I know you're still there," he whispered, "but you don't get to decide anymore." He let go. The mirror vanished into the dark water without a sound. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the whispers stopped. Days passed, then weeks. Ion's life slowly returned to something resembling normal. The numbness faded. Fear returned, but in a healthy way, reminding him that he was human, imperfect, real. The gaps in his memory stopped appearing. Friends said he seemed different again, quieter, but grounded. Sometimes, though, late at night, Ion would catch his reflection in a window or a screen and pause. The reflection always matched him perfectly now. No delayed movements, no unfamiliar expressions. Still, he never stared too long. Months later, far from the city, a fisherman pulled something heavy from the river. An old mirror, its frame dark and worn, its glass cracked but intact. As the man wiped the surface clean, he frowned. For just a second, the reflection blinked, and somewhere far away, Ion felt an unexplainable chill pass through him, brief, distant, and gone. The mirror had lost, but it had not forgotten. Thank you for watching this chilling story. If you enjoyed The Mirror That Watches You, don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more horror stories that will haunt your nights. Share this video with friends who dare to watch, and remember, some mirrors are better left alone. Sleep tight if you can. The end